I'm J.C. Collier, and I'm with the Oklahoma Living Legends. And the person I'm going to interview, will permit him to give his name and spellings, and I'll turn it over to him now.
My name is Numa P. Avendano, Avendano. I'm a retired colonel. I have been retired 19 years after having served 42 years in the Army. I live at 1801 Northwest 80th Street, Lawton, Oklahoma. Having relocated here in 1975. This interview is being taken on Thursday, 3 April 1980. Enough of that?
That's enough.
I was born in Spain, specifically the city of Santander, Spain, and came here with my parents at age about 6 or 7. My education was primarily given to me by a private governess, with the result that I went to high school at age 12. And I did my high school in 2 years instead of the usual 4. And then I went to college at the end of 1916. I went to the College of the City of New York. And I was to graduate in 1920. But because of personal family reasons, to wit, my father having remarried a very young girl, I elected not to accept any more help from my father to continue my college education, although I was already entering my senior year. So I decided to join the Army. And I was very fortunate that I was assigned to the United States Military Academy Detachment of Field Artillery at West Point, New York, the selection having been made because of my previous education. I served under the late General Jacob L. Devers, who was then a major. And as far as I'm concerned, he was the greatest man I have ever known. General Devers became my mentor and actually molded my character. Anything that I have done in my life, I can credit General Devers because of what he did. One of my adventures in the detachment at West Point may be of interest to record. I was a sentry at gate number 2, the south gate. And my special orders were that the gate would be locked at 9 p.m. And then from then on, to allow no one without proper authority to enter the gate. I had just locked the gate about 15 minutes when a Ford automobile stops at the gate, and the driver blew his horn and said, "Sentry, open the gate quickly. This is the superintendent." So I drew my pistol, came to the raised pistol, and said, dismount, and be recognized. So his aide, the superintendent's aide, was then Captain Louis Hibbs. More lately, or rather during World War II, was Major General Louis H. Hibbs. So he stuck his head out of the window of the car, and he says, "This is General MacArthur, let him in." I said, "Sorry, sir, dismount and be recognized." General MacArthur immediately dismounted and came to me. I came to the salute with a pistol. He congratulated me on sticking to my orders, and I let him pass through. This is one of the things that is very vivid in my memories. Then something else that was known at that time was the fact that the ration meaning 3 meals per man per day. The ration was 50 cents per day per man. So with 50 cents, the cooks, experienced soldiers of about 15, 20 years of service, could do wonders. And of course we had to water the milk and economize in every way possible. But the food was very substantial, and we enjoyed it. So General Devers began preparing me for an appointment to the Corps of Cadets. The Corps at that time consisted of 1,200 men. Today is over 4,000. But in those days, 1,200 was a lot of men, especially right after World War I. So, again, fate interceded, and I did not get the appointment for personal reasons. And the reasons were having inherited my mother's legacy. She had died a couple of years before, and through the efforts of one of the officers, the late Lieutenant Clarence P. Townsley, who died as a brigadier general about 1955. He had me emancipated through the courts, so that before I became 21, I was able to have my mother's legacy. And that, of course, made me feel like I was a very big man. $10,000 in those days was a lot of money, not what it is today. So I did not go to West Point, but I was told that I could get a commission through the National Guard. So I went back to my home in Louisiana and joined the Louisiana National Guard, and I was commissioned through the National Guard, and then I went back to an active duty. After my first marriage in 1926, my wife and I came to Fort Sill. I was assigned to take the Battery Officers course, it was called in those days. Today they call it the basic course. So one of my instructors was the late Colonel, then Captain Walter Lattimore, whose son is being interviewed here today. Captain Laramore was an excellent horseman, and he did not only teach us the fine points of equitation, but interested all of the class in polo. So we played polo over here, and when we went back to our home stations, we retained the sport as a hobby. When we came to Lawton was about 5,000 or 10,000 inhabitants. And we stayed with a private family. Mrs. Trosper and her sister, Miss Healy, conducted this, you might call it a boarding house, for officers, mostly bachelor officers, who were waiting for their families to reach here. Among the people that we became friendly with there were two high school teachers, one of whom was Edith McKinley. Edith McKinley and my wife became very close friends, and frequently we would walk down from our house was at 713 D Avenue, and we walked down to the shore. And of course I felt quite embarrassed because Edith McKinley was 6'3" and I was 5'2½". So I used to find some way of either staying or wearing civilian clothes rather than uniform when we had Edith McKinley with us. Then there was an officer by the name of Captain William B. Riley, later Colonel Riley, whom I last saw in England in 1944, before the invasion of Normandy. At Fort Sill, there was a detachment called the Color Detachment in those days, and the stable sergeant happened to learn that I was from Louisiana. His name was Sergeant McGinnity from Burbridge, Louisiana. But every time that we would go to equitation, I was sure to have the best horse in the line because I was Lieutenant Avendano from Louisiana. So our schooling at Fort Sill was very, very interesting. The commanding general was Brigadier General George Leroy Irwin, and the assistant commandant was Colonel William P. Ennis, alias Bull Ennis, one of the hardest men the Army has produced. His pet hobby was to see that every officer had perfectly clean and shined boots. And if your boots weren't shined, he would let you know in no uncertain terms. Something else was the question of promptitude. You have to be on time at all classes, no excuses. One time, it was a very cold morning, about the end of November, 1927. And an old captain of about 35 years of age, I was 22 or 23, was having difficulty bridling his horse. So I went to help him. And the trick was to take the bit in your cupped hands, blow hot air, and the horse would accept it quickly. So I did just that, and That delayed me coming out to the formation. Of course, the instructor was there immediately, took my name down, and at noontime, here's my name on the bulletin board to report to the assistant commandant. So was the captain whom I had helped. This captain was Captain Kuden. And of course, we sat there in the anteroom waiting for the assistant commandant to call us. And he called Captain Kuden first. And Captain Kuden began explaining why he was late. And he was chewed down one side and up the other side because Bolanes told him that an excuse and an alibi are nothing but damn lies, and he doesn't want any of that. So, when I heard all this, I went in, and he said, in those days, lieutenants were called Mister. From captain on, they were by rank, but first lieutenants, second lieutenants, regardless of age, they were called Mister. So he says, Mr. Avendano, come in. I went in, saluted, and he said, you were late at formation this morning. Yes, sir. Why? No excuse, sir. He looked at me square in the eye and he said, that's all, dismissed. I had heard Captain Kuden's fate, and I knew what was coming if I had alibi. So those things stay on my mind, and the firing was entirely different then and what it is today. We did not have the system of forward observers. We had the system called the battery commander system. The battery commander was the firing officer, and the communication was by telephone or by semaphore flags. So, when a battery would leave the new post area where the 18th Field Artillery was stationed to go to the East Range or the West Range, they would have to start at 5:30 a.m. to be in position for about 7:30. And of course, to get back after the horses were taken care of, they would walk them around until they cooled off, which resulted that many a time we were delayed when there was a dance at the club because we had to wait for the horses to cool off. There was in the advanced class at that time, which was all for majors and lieutenant colonels. They were mostly majors. There were 5 majors who were general officers in World War II. And there was one major of the Japanese Army whose name was Major Hata, H-A-T-A. And when I came back to duty at Fort Sill in 1946, 2 of my good friends were colonels and occupying high responsible jobs here. For example, Walter Laramore was the Inspector General, and Colonel Everett Williams was the Deputy Assistant Commandant in charge of the installation. And Captain Williams, when he was my instructor in gunnery, later when he went to the Philippines and was captured in Corregidor with General Wainwright, and he made the infamous march, the so-called Death March. And he told me that he saw Major Hata, who was then Major General Hata, and Major Hatta recognized him and talked to him. But yet he was one of the cruelest men that he had ever met in the Japanese 4 years of imprisonment. Let's see what else. Break a bit and see if I can. During the interruption, I was asked a couple of questions which might be of interest. And that was the service in World War II. In World War II, I was attached to the 3rd Tank Destroyer Group. The Tank Destroyer Command was created during World War II for the purpose of fighting German tanks. But in their tactics, nobody had thought of the possibility of using so many guns as field artillery. So when I got to England 9 months before the invasion of Normandy, I was sent to the British Royal Armour Corps Tactical School. And after the graduation from that school, I was given the mission of preparing a doctrine for the employment of tank destroyer guns as field artillery, for which I received a commendation and all that, and the doctrine was employed during World War II. The concept was that here a tank destroyer battalion had 1875 millimeter, later 90 millimeter pieces. And unless they had a mission of trying to go and find tanks to kill, they were inactive. So we began using the tank destroyer battalions. And if you can see the situation, one battalion had 18 guns, whereas a field artillery battalion had only 12 guns. So when you have a tank destroyer battalion with 18 guns, supplementing a field artillery battalion, you had 3 times as many pieces to fire. So at any rate, that was the Tank Destroyer Command, and I was executive officer of the 3rd Tank Destroyer Group. Then I was placed on the planning board of the 5th Corps. We have this classification bigot, which was higher than top secret, because we only knew about the preparation for the invasion of Normandy. We knew when, as to time, we knew where, and troops to participate. The date nobody knew. But nevertheless, the classification bigot was required to enter the planning room and participating in all of the sessions of planning. And believe you me, we have everything planned, including how many safety pins it might be required to tie a bandage to a wounded man. We have the cemetery of the 5th Corps all outlined. Of course, I don't know whether you know it or not, but in Europe, men were not buried in caskets. They were placed in a mattress cover and dumped in a hole. in the Pacific, to which I went after Europe. They put him in ponchos. You know, these this impermeable garments. So we went into the marshalling areas on 15 May 1944, and we started out to the middle of the channel when we were recalled because of bad weather. And apparently there was a question of getting favorable weather, and it had to be either the next day or 2 weeks later. So Eisenhower ruled that we go the next day. So we went on the 6th of June. And of course, I was in an LST, landing ship tank. And the LSTs, of course, rolled right into the beach. I landed in Utah Beach. The opposition was not as hard in Utah as it was in Omaha Beach, further to the south. But nevertheless, we went to Utah Beach, and our first action was with the 4th Division. And then we participated in the fighting march from Utah Beach to Cherbourg. We stopped in the town of Saint-Mère-Église, and then through Highway M13, and naturally we had to go back and forth with the tank destroyer battalions to emplace them where they were best needed. Finally got to Cherbourg about the 19th of June. And of course the famous general from Louisiana also, by the name of Joseph Lawton Collins, was commanding the 7th Corps. And after we cleared Cherbourg, they left our group there to protect the town because there were commando raids from the Channel Islands into Cherbourg. So we stayed there about 2 weeks and then moved south to rejoin the First Army and all the way into Koblenz, Germany. There were peculiar things and funny things, as you might call them, in active combat, as they were otherwise. But for example, one time, one of my good soldiers went AWOL, and he was found in a ditch, completely drunk. And when they brought him to me, he told me that it had been raining so much that he decided to make it quit raining. So he got full of Calvados, Calvados being a brandy that was manufactured in Normandy. And he didn't feel a drop of rain until we found him. Likewise, we had another young lieutenant. He was bending OCS, and he got drunk on Calvados one time, and they found him on his way hitchhiking a ride to the front to go kill Hitler. So we had to convince him that he had to wait till we got up there too. So things of that kind always happen, both in peace and in war. Can you think of anything else?
What was your rank at this time?
Well, let's see. Lieutenant Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel. Then, after we finished in Europe, I was redeployed to the Pacific Theater, specifically Okinawa. So I can claim having fought both Germans and Japs. But in Okinawa, I had a warrant officer, regular Army sergeant, by the name of Tommy Steele. And he was the type of man that could procure anything that you needed, regardless. If you needed a jeep or anything, he went and got it. As a matter of fact, one time our bivouac was on the hill overlooking Naha. And I was on my way to inspect one of the battalions when my jeep got stuck in the mud, and the warrant officer Steele came by and he pulled me out, and he said, "Colonel, you can't be getting stuck in the mud here. I'll fix you up." So the next day I found in front of my tent a whistle. A whistle being a vehicle that has tracks, and you can go in through any kind of terrain in it. But things of that time are very vivid in my memory.
How many languages do you speak? I know you speak French and Spanish
And Italian.
Italian.
Incidentally, talking about languages, my father spoke 7 languages. But I was very chagrined here day before yesterday. I addressed the Allied officers here in conjunction with Colonel Marley on banking. And I saw one who had the name Spain on his blouse. So I went to talk to him in Spanish, and I found that I was very sluggish because I had no chance to talk Spanish. Can you think of anything else?
What about your
Oh, as a matter of fact, I am very fortunate in having a very good memory. And my memory goes back to the time that I was about a year old. In fact, maybe lower than that, because I began writing a memory of my life, you might say. And I attached 2 copies to this, my first 2 pages. This is a lot more. But the first remembrance I have of my mother was to see this beautiful apparition holding me close to her, singing to me. And I must have been about, I guess, less than a year old. But at any rate, my father was educated in the University of Heidelberg, Germany. And then, when he finished his education, he went back to Spain. And his father was a general officer in the Spanish army. And he required his male children to take 1 of 4 courses of action. Number 1, go to the military academy and become career officers. Number 2, serve their time in the army and go about their business. Number 3, enter the priesthood. And number 4, out. Go make your way in life as best you can. So my father had a classmate at Heidelberg whose father was an investment banker in Hamburg, Germany. So my father went back to Germany, and he got a job with this man's father, whose name was my father's classmate was Adolphus Stahl, and his father was Julius Stahl. As you can see, they were German Jews, but they were in the investment banking, and that's how we came to eventually come to America. By the way, you might find it strange that I was born in Spain and yet raised in Germany. Every time one of the children would be born, my parents would go back to Spain. At least my mother would go back to Spain until the child was born, and then back to Germany. And when my father became a partner in the banking firm, he was sent to America for the purpose of buying future coffee crops. You know how they deal in these futures. So he had, I venture to say that the reason why this had tremendous purchase of coffee in Latin America was because of the preparation for World War I, which came about 7 years later. But anyhow, that's how we came to America. And of course, specifically, we first settled in New York. Then we went to Central America and back to New Orleans. Two of my father's uncles had refused to serve in the Spanish Army also. So they were kicked out of home, and they came to New Orleans and established the wine business there. And when the Civil War broke out, they enlisted in the Confederate Army. So they served in the Confederate Army. And they died about the 1880s or 90s. Can you think of anything else? When I came back from Okinawa, I came to duty at Fort Sill, and I was assigned as S4 of the 6th Training Regiment, Colonel William D. Dixon commanding. And we still had 2 batteries of mule or pack artillery. The stables are there facing Sheridan Road, not too far from the gas station. But at any rate, one of my last duties was the shipping of the mules to Fort Reno, Oklahoma. So I had to have the mules led by recruits from the area to the loading ramp across the highway here. Across the highway there was a cattle and horse loading ramp where we put the mules, and from there to load them in stock cars. There was a sergeant who was trying to get a mule in one of the cars, and he was having difficulty. And going back to the things I learned here in 1927, I saw immediately what was his problem. So I went to him, I said, Sergeant, let me give you a hand here. So he said, well, Colonel, you're going to have a hell of a time getting this mule in here. I said, no, I'll bet you $2 I can do it. So he says, I'll take you on. So we shook hands on the bet. And what I did was that to reverse the mule was being led, and every time he would try to go up, he would balk. So the best thing to do was to reverse the mule's end, put her south end to the stock car, and then, having learned that when you lead a horse, you mustn't look at him in the face because he doesn't want to step on you. So he will try to hold back. So the thing to do, I got this mule there and I made the ugliest face I could, and in so doing, I scared the mule back and she backed up into the car. So the sergeant says, Colonel, that ain't fair, that ain't fair. Well, give me $4. So after Fort Sill, I was assigned to reactivate the Washington Artillery of New Orleans, a famous National Guard regiment which has had its inception in 1838. And of course I had to accept downgrading from full colonel to lieutenant colonel to do this and command one of the battalions. And I was very successful. I had it activated in less than 6 months' time and ready for field training. Then I went back to active duty and came back to Fort Sill in 1948. We lived in Lawton in a house at 1610 Avenue E. And we spent almost 2 years on duty here in what was then called the Department of Training Literature and Visual Aids. And our headquarters was right across the way from this premises here, where that nursery is now. And my commanding officer there was Colonel William D. Williams. And some of the old-timers then were very close friends of mine, like Colonel Lattimore and Colonel Williams and General Colbert. And the commanding general was General Clift Andrews, ANDRUS, who came from commanding a division in Europe to here to be commandant. We stayed here 2 years, and the duty was very, very pleasant. Then, when I retired, I went to work for the Louisiana Civil Defense Agency as state coordinator until I retired from there too. And then my first wife passed away after 47 and a half years of marriage, but I was very fortunate that one of her best friends took pity on me and saved my life, because I would have been very unhappy. So she married me, And I brought her here on a visit. We had friends here retired. I brought her here on a visit. And the next morning we stayed on the post. The next morning she said, I love this place. I surely would like to live here. I said, are you serious? She said, yes, I surely would. So we went downtown and we bought a brand new house like one would buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store. And we have been here going on 5 years. Extremely happy. We participate in everything on the post, and thanks to these beautiful ladies of the museum, I'm enjoying my duty here as a volunteer. So that's the story, folks.